All right, welcome and thank you for being here. Just a quick reminder before we dive in, like, subscribe, comment, leave a review so we can continue making these amazing episodes. And now I have got to say, I am so excited for this conversation. I feel like I always say that because I do have great guests, but this conversation hasn't even started and it's already blowing my mind because Tyler Engle, my guest, you blow my mind. When I was first introduced to your content, I was like, what is this? Who is this person? And you are just so kind, so sweet, so accessible. And I'm ready to dive in, explore your story, and see what happens from all of this. Tyler, thank you so much for being here with me today. It's truly an honor.
Of course. Thanks for having me. Love getting deep on this stuff.
Well, I'm excited, just like I said, to see where this goes. And there were two things as I was doing my research, not just on the content that you put out, but just on you as a human. And there were two things that really jumped out to me that I just love and I want to call out from the beginning. The first thing to me is that you seem to be genuinely interested in improving humanity through the work that you're doing, which I think a lot of people have that ideal, but you're actually very clearly doing it to me. And the other thing, just for you as a teacher to understand, I'm sure you do, but is that you do such a good job of making some of the most complex topics that humans can wrap their minds around easy for people to understand, and not just easy, but interesting as well. So just my 2 points to kick things off.
Thank you. I knew that if I didn't start it on something that I actually believed in, it would just fail. I had 5 other ideas of what I wanted to do. I had a previous business. I did high-rise window cleaning. I didn't want to be the best at that. I wanted to do something that meant something to me. Making sure that that came through in the content was a very high priority. Even before I got into what people wanted to hear, I just wanted them to know that I was about it, really. I didn't want to come at it from an angle where people did not get the most authentic version of me that I could possibly communicate.
Yeah. And that comes through so clearly. So I'd love for you to kind of kick the conversation off by describing what is the work that you do? How would you describe it?
That was another thing I set out to do with the project, was make something that I couldn't get pigeonholed into one thing. Because I loved ancient history, but I also loved all the new science that was coming out. And I also loved the spiritual concepts and how it ties in with consciousness and metaphysics. And I was like, how do I weave all these into one? So when I first started making content, it was a game for me. To be honest, I hate making content. It is kind of a pain to do the videos the way I do them. I make the video first and then I talk over the video. So I don't shoot what I say. I make the content and then I talk over the content pretty much. So it's a bunch of ideas strung together and then I kind of unpack them as they come at you. And that was the game that I was making for myself, is how can I tie all of these things in together? What's the most complex thing I can think of, but how can I make it exploded into something very simple? That was where I started, but where it evolved, I didn't know where it was initially going to go. I didn't know what people were going to like. So I just started making everything. First, it was music because I was most into, and then it evolved into the ancient history because that was kind of my music project had a little ancient history thing to it. So I just was I'm gonna focus in on this. And then all of the, spiritual stuff comes with that. And so after all that came out, I was I can talk about anything. So it's mostly explaining ancient sciences and metaphysics with modern science and music. That's if I could distill it down into something that's the most dialed in, that's what it is.
Yeah, gosh. And did you feel like people would be really interested in it, or you were just look, this is my passion. I'm going to put it out there and just see what happens?
So my business kind of fell apart during COVID because no one was going to office buildings. So I had a whole bunch of clients and nobody needed services for buildings that weren't occupied. So I was really running low on cash. I actually racked up a whole bunch of debt staying alive through it. And I was like, okay, something's got to work. One of these things is going to work. And this project was the one that I didn't think would work the most. I'm just going to give this a shot. I don't know what's going to happen, but I'm going to give it a shot. It's kind of threw everything at the wall and saw what was going to stick. But as far as the content goes, I didn't talk to anybody about it. I didn't know people were into that stuff. So I had no way of knowing how big the audience was. And apparently it's huge. So
yeah. Oh my gosh. So, okay, you have this engineering background, you create music as well. Tell us maybe just a little bit about how you grew up, because most entrepreneurs have a very winding path with, I have a background in fitness and business, and I was a high school English teacher and like all of these different things. So how did we end up here?
That's a really good question. I don't think I've ever explained this before. Entrepreneurship was like my main thing for a while. I was the typical hustle bro. No, I could not stop doing business stuff. My family is pretty much all entrepreneurs. My dad is the closest example I had. He had a building maintenance company as well when I was in high school because I didn't want a normal job. I didn't want hours and stuff. And I could make way more money doing that. So started out that. And then I was kind of trying to see how I could expand, how to make more money and how to do more things instead of just staying in one lane. So I started doing marketing stuff. I bought a drone and I did drone marketing when that was very new. In college, this was like a high school college crossover. In college, I went to school for computer engineering and I wanted to focus on augmented reality for drones. So basically creating a VR world that the drone sees, but you're actually flying in a real world. That was my project for graduation. I pursued that and I really liked the computer aspect of things, the programming thing that made sense in my brain. And I got a job in data storage after college, worked there for 4 years. And I had a feeling I wasn't going to like the corporate life. And it was 100% confirmed. I did not like it, but I learned a lot. I learned a lot about organizational structure. I learned a lot about testing because that's really all it is, stress testing machines for data storage. It gave me like a lot of insight into computer architecture, like how things are assembled and why computers look the way they do. And that had a huge influence on my analysis for ancient places and consciousness and stuff like that. If we reduce everything back to what it actually is, we're all vibration. Everything is a form of oscillation, and that's proven by science now at this point. Connecting that, it was like, this is a clear stepping stone. I can bring my knowledge in with this old knowledge and then kind of piece everything together using what I had learned in that journey, right? There was only one way to make that work though, because I couldn't just do this as a hobby. Then that's where the entrepreneurship came in. So that influenced my authenticity a lot on the internet too, because I didn't want to take this weird esoteric angle, like a secret conspiracy angle, because that didn't seem genuine to me. And as far as like business goes, I didn't want to be like selling secrecy. I wanted to sell what I knew. I wanted to give people a piece of what I had. I'd paid for it with my college degree and got traveling the world and talking to people and fusing these ideas together. And I wanted to give people something that they could use as a foundation to explore other stuff like this, because there's so much out there. We're just scratching the surface of all of this stuff. So that was my aim with the products. And my first book in December, I think October maybe of 2022 was the first thing that I released that actually started generating an income that I could use, because social media doesn't really pay you that much. Like people think that if you have a ton of followers, you're making a ton of money, but now you can barely live off of it if you have a million followers. So I had to kind of cover the bases there, and it was a good exercise in how to not be overly pushy or not genuine with it. If I'm going to sell you something, I'm going to at least make it funny. I'm going to hit you with an ad maybe, but you're going to laugh at it.
Yeah, yeah. Well, you definitely do everything in such a genuine way. And for people who aren't familiar with your content, you're literally trying to help people understand the mysteries of the universe. It's not just simple stuff. And, some examples. And I want to see kind of where your spiritual angle comes into play with this. I just took my mom to Italy for a few weeks. It was my third time there, but we were visiting a lot of the Etruscan ruins. We recently posted a piece of content on that. I remember, being at Machu Picchu. This was like 10 or 11 years ago, and thinking there is no way humans alone, like, I just don't understand how these things could have happened. And I don't know if you're familiar with the work of Dolores Cannon. Is she familiar to you?
Yeah.
So, she's got all these books where she's putting people under hypnosis and bringing through that information. So obviously this is like really big stuff. I walked the Via Cavas. I saw that was in your video as well. And it's just really stuff that I have so many questions about, as so many people do. Can you give us the answer to some of the big mysteries of the universe? How did it happen? Like, how did people make Machu Picchu? I don't know if you've been, but like those stones are enormous and they're on the top of a mountain, and it's crazy.
The southern part of America is one of the most interesting places on earth to me. I've been in a lot of places in Mexico, but I'm planning on going to Peru next year. So that's like, I'm going to spend a month out there, and I'm taking my entire camera crew and stuff. We're going to shoot some stuff, but I'm very familiar with all of it. Believe it or not, I don't have all the answers. I have a lot of theories, but
I'm good with theories. I know you can't answer everything.
So there's a difference in my content. So like short form is kind of more I'm trying to give you shock value. Like, I'm trying to show you something that you've probably never seen before that is real and it exists on Earth and we can go see it. The explanations are really hard to sift through because you're dealing with 200 years of history and interpretation of these places. Everything has been reconstructed. I was just in Egypt, and without a guide, if you were just looking at stuff, you wouldn't tell what was modern day restoration versus Roman versus the original Egyptian. There's so much time in between there. You have to have a deep understanding of history to be like, this is the original stuff. We need to focus on this. And that's what I try and get to. The thing that I think gets a lot of people is the scale, because most people don't understand how many places like this exist. Everyone knows Giza and Angkor Wat and all these very famous ancient places, but they don't understand how much is underneath all of them. So like when you were in Italy, the Etruscan ruins, most of them aren't excavated. You can go see are the ones that are poking above the ground. Petra is the same, for example. 90% of Petra is unexcavated. When you walk through it, you can see the roofs of other buildings that are just covered in sand. They just haven't excavated. We don't have the resources to do that. Personally, I think we do, but I think there's political and barriers that are in the way of really getting to the bottom of this. If we were to plan this out today, like we were to plan a project of we're going to build a city in a mountain, what would that require us to do? We need, boring machines and heavy equipment and a lot of people working on really hard rock and people planning this and designing this and making sure that it's safe for people to live in. There's a huge project scope with all of this stuff, and time doesn't necessarily explain all that for some of these things. I'm looking at what I'm very interested in is seeing what way were they able to manipulate matter in a way that we're just kind of now discovering. And I think that in the next couple of years, we're going to see that that's true. There's a lot of research going on in the old alchemical traditions, ironically. Things that maybe the public at least wasn't aware of. The abilities that they had come from that line of thinking. And I'm very careful to say this because there's a lot of pushback to this. There's a lot of evidence right now that's been verified, tested in front of people. The work of Malcolm Bendel, for example, he's doing a lot of stuff with the old alchemical research. He's got a thunderstorm generator that can pretty much eliminate all the emissions coming out of your tailpipe and produce breathable oxygen. And that's just one example of that he's been able to do with basically just geometry. At the core of it, those people had a better understanding of how to do that than we do, because we're very focused on classifying and dividing up sciences into independent fields of study, where before it was one field of study. It was just how do we work with nature, because that's the underlying laws of the universe are the natural laws. How do we not bend them, but work with them so that they're helping us as a society instead of us just extracting as much as we can and then putting it into an iPhone, So Lot to unpack there, but that's my thesis on all that.
So many questions. So funny enough, I was in your video where you're going through the Etruscan ruins. There's that pyramid. I was there in Bamarzo. It's like in the middle of nowhere. So I thought it was so funny. I have a picture. My dog travels with me. So I have a picture of me and her in front of this pyramid that was in your video. And it's funny because I feel like, especially just this most recent trip that I took to Italy, I was in the Pantheon, right? And our guide was just explaining they cannot figure out how that dome made sense and how it was created. And you see the pillars that came from Egypt and just what it took to move them. It just makes you kind of feel like we think what we're so advanced today, but it kind of makes me feel like people just were a lot smarter before. How you feel about that?
Totally agree. This is another thing I've been working on lately is how consciousness develops from the anchors of the past. And when I say that, I mean monuments, and this could range from anything from like pyramids to tombs to Stonehenge, whatever. What I think is going on here, transmission of knowledge, and it was like the most incredible foresight I think I've ever seen. We do some long-term projects, right? Like Hoover Dam has a clock in it that is astronomically aligned so that people know when it was built. That's kind of a long-term project, right? We don't do very many of them, but we still do them. Back then, they did them all the time. That was what you did. It was kind of like a bookmark for this is how much we learned. If you're just like a normal everyday person and you're looking at this thing and you don't understand the geometry and the alignment and the material science that it took to work the stone and get it to do what it's doing, and all of these things that are very advanced to conceptually wrap your head around just by looking at it, because most people would be like, oh, that's a tomb. That's cool. That guy must have been very important. When you put that much effort into it, in terms of the construction, anything that's written on it essentially irrelevant, because you can graffiti something and you can say I made this and 1922. You can say that on anything that you can engrave, but what you can't do is you can't change the alignments, and you can't change how fine the stone is worked and how precise it is, and all of that is information that's held within the monument. So until someone is able at that level to deconstruct what it took to do that, then it's going to be, people are just going to walk right on by it, and that's fine. I think that they knew that something was going to happen, and there's going to be an exchange of power, and there was going to be this event that could potentially last thousands of years, where we're kind of trapped in a very specific mindset, which is useful for creating science, material science, and the technology that we have today, but it's not useful for integrating that with the world. What they knew is there's going to be a time when we understand more than they did in terms of like the material science and construction and stuff, but we're going to need a way to reintegrate that with the earth and make a more balanced lifestyle, because what we're doing right now is clearly not working in a lot of respects. We're kind of at the point where I don't like using the word activation because it's got this very spiritual context to it. But for me, what that means is we've reached a level to where that information from them can activate you into their mindset. Just by looking at it and understanding it, you put yourself in their mindset and you get a little bit of that knowledge. It's like their bookmarks. What we're doing right now is kind of the focus of my work as well, is building that foundation for people to be able to receive those things, not necessarily just decode everything that I'm looking at, but like there may be something that you see somewhere in the world that I don't see because you have a different frame of reference and you have experiences that give you different perspective and a different lens than I have. Giving people tools to do that is my like main mission, everything that I'm doing. I would say it's to get us back to that mindset where we cared more about the future than the present or past, because right now we're very much living in the moment and they didn't. And for being that old, a civilization that old, we're caring about what's going on thousands of years in the future. That seems like something we should pay attention to. Something that I would definitely be interested in looking deeper at.
Do you think that's because they were just more connected to Earth and more spiritually attuned? Or what do you think the reason for that mindset was?
I think there was probably a lot more influences outside of our normal everyday life. Like, for example, they were very much into altered states of consciousness. And we are too. Our society is very much so into it as well. In America, like alcohol leaning or like pharmaceutical leaning, I wouldn't say it's as philosophical as theirs was, but I know they were interested in connecting with the unseen worlds, higher dimensions of consciousness. Since we've cut that tie, that's really what's cut our connection with it. And you can look at the popularity of ayahuasca retreats in South America, or just like all of these places, Bali, Indonesia, like these places that do very targeted awakenings. Sometimes people need a compound to ingrain patterns of thinking. Sometimes you need to get shook up so hard that it makes you realize that you are not separate from everything and you are actually an integral part of everything that's going on. And on a societal level, if everyone thought that way, that to me seems like enough of a motivation to make these things. If they can all connect and see how this is going to go in the future, that makes sense why we would all get together and be like, no, our great grandkids are going to be encountering some really tough stuff if we don't put this here right now.
And from a less scientific perspective, like the way that I would perceive it, all these ancient civilizations and societies, like being in oneness, equality, like being connected to the earth, and then the rise of need for power and control and shaping people through things like religion. And it makes sense to me why, as there were future lifetimes and things like that, it feels like we've gone from this oneness and connected, many thousands of years ago, to being very much rigid and controlled. Perhaps we're at a moment where we're starting to move back toward how we once were. I don't know. This is above my pay grade.
I share that perspective in a way. I think that a lot of people take it a little far in terms of saying that they were altruistic at their core. There was definitely problems that we can see that were happening in the historical record. Those are not really questionable. What I do think is a lot of the things that we're encountering now are very intentional. And by that, I mean, if you're super connected to nature, say you're regionally very successful, your people are thriving where they're thriving. There's no way to progress as a population or a civilization unless you connect with another civilization and get some of their knowledge and some of their resources to make new things and create new potentials and lift the population up as a whole. Because right now, pretty much every one of us lives a better life than a king or queen 500 years ago. And that is the result of connecting the entire planet. This would not be possible if we didn't do that. Even us talking right now, this device cannot be made without multiple countries working in harmony and then multiple people coming together in a corporation. Create a device that I can wirelessly talk to you about this stuff on. When I say intentional, there's a limit to how far a civilization or a people can go in a certain mindset. And to break that mindset, there had to be a imperialist mindset, a more Roman, a Western mindset, in the sense of we have to find a way to connect everybody together. Some people went about that in a very not well thought out way. And some people, Marcus Aurelius, for example, I love everything that he's written. I've read everything that he's written. His mindset, in my opinion, is really, really good for modern day thinking. There's a lot of value there. But the people before him, there was a lot of very brutal stuff going on. So we have to kind of balance out the views of how consciousness in the terms of the human, how it progresses through time. Because if we would have stayed in that ancient mindset, I believe time is cyclical. I think their cycle was over, but they didn't want it all to be over. They didn't want that to be the last time that a high civilization inhabited this place. There seems to have been a collective initiative between cultures, cross-culturally, to leave specific keys to getting us back to where we were. And that would require waking up operatives from the inside at a later date. So people that, like what I was saying before, could read these things and look at them like time capsules of information and data that can be used to solve problems that we might be encountering right now. When we analyze it that way, even the really bad stuff kind of has a place. No one likes it. We're all kind of on the same page there. But would those lessons have been learned any other way? I don't know. Look at it very objectively. And if I was a different person in a different time getting oppressed by the Romans or whoever was doing the, organizing, I would probably feel a little differently. But I have to take this view because I'm trying to understand it as a whole. I'm trying to understand the progression and where we're going, because that's really all the history is. It's only useful if you can look at it and say, we've been there, I don't want to go there again, or we've been there, that was leading us to this place. Like that's the utility of history, and that's why I like it.
Yeah, gosh, I've never heard that perspective before with the intentionality component of leaving those clues. That's so fascinating. I want to go back to this whole thing I'm a bit hung up on, and I feel like I know what your answer is going to be, but do you think the pyramids, Machu Picchu, Easter Island, Stonehenge, all of those things, do you think it's all man-made?
I don't think it was necessarily that. I think we had some assistance, but not necessarily like an alien assistance. And this is why I love all this, because the modern UFO stuff kind of plugs into this. And thinking about life as things other than humans, intelligent life as not as like gray aliens that are walking around, but like other ways that consciousness can manifest, like plasma is super interesting to me. I think there was influences in a non-human way that allowed us to unlock clues to make them. And that would be like looking at all of these stories, looking at all of the legends and interpreting them as experiences where your consciousness contacts something higher, like a higher level of consciousness. That level of consciousness kind of directs you to an epiphany into, okay, this is how you do this. This is the design for this, and this is how you take this rock out of this quarry, and this is where you put it, and this is, so like not in a schematic format, but in the form of like inspiration. It's like music. I don't know what the song is going to be when I first sit down to make the song. It kind of unfolds as you make it, and the more you get in that creative process and flow, it reveals itself. Like Statue of David, that was liberated from the stone. It existed there, then the other stuff was removed from it. So I feel like we have a lot of stuff that's rattling around here. Most of it needs to be removed to reveal the art or the architecture or the design. Our modern technology is not helping with this. The distraction and everything is just kind of like is crushing people's ability to connect with that. They had a way of doing it where it was ritualized and it was more like a communication system in terms of like a internet of the ancient world, where you had an address of a higher consciousness that you could communicate with that was giving you specific information. Maybe one of them was telling you how to lay out this plan for this building on the ground. And then another one was telling you, this is how we work with the materials that are on the planet. Then another one was like, this is the function of that thing. That to me explains deities and these ritual experiences that they were having. A lot of things that we consider rudimentary or mythological today, if you look at it from that lens, it becomes more of a science. It becomes more of a technology that they were the device. Instead of having a cell phone, they were the device that was making the connection with these things. That allowed them to do all of what they're doing today.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense to me. I've heard a lot of, just to use your example of musicians, but also writers and things like that, basically say it feels like, I don't know where this idea came from. It wasn't mine. And all of a sudden ended up on an album or something like that. Treat me like I'm 2 years old. I understand that part. But like, how back in those times would you get a rock that was so huge and heavy up a mountain? The movement of these things to me is the thing I get like the most hung up on.
That's the golden question. And it's funny too, because like everybody fights about that concept of it. As an engineer, that's the thing that got me into this. During COVID, I was like, there's no way we don't know how the pyramid was made at this point in our history. We got to have that figured out. Someone has looked into it. I watched like 5 documentaries back to back one day. I was just so bored. Nobody has a good solution for this. Like there was all these different ideas and I was like, none of these make sense. Like none of these from a logical perspective makes sense. And then you go to Egypt and you look at the stuff and you're like, it makes less sense. Like none of it makes sense. There's a lot of theories that I love exploring, and a lot of them have to do with the field of study, I guess. So you could say it's kind of been under wraps, mostly after World War II, an intentional drop of technology from some other civilization. It's so speculative, I can't pin it down, but I think there was an intentional drop of some technology that we have kind of reverse engineered. It breaks our view of the laws of physics, but maybe back then it really didn't. And what I think was being used was a combination of acoustics, because that is the only tool humans have to project energy and information is the voice. We have muscles and bodies to move stuff. We have limitations to that. We have limitations in muscle mass and things that we can do there. Audio acoustics can not only have an effect down to the quantum level, they have the ability to, different materials. It travels faster through stone, it travels faster through water, and it travels slower through air. There's different ways of modulating that signal to achieve something, like a control function. But to explain it like a 5-year-old, basically what that new technology is doing is creating a bubble around an object that exists outside of the normal laws of physics, outside of the traditional space and time that we see around us. The mechanisms for doing that are unclear. They have not been released. I have some speculations, and there's definitely a geometric manipulation of the electromagnetic field. So what does that mean? That means the chip in your cell phone is doing exactly that. It's a geometric puzzle piece, essentially, that routes electromagnet through a labyrinth of circuits to do a specific task. What they were doing is using a combination of acoustics for control and form of what we're seeing today with that technology in a way that allowed them to treat as one substance, essentially. Because I know you've seen the stones. They look like they were liquefied or melted, or they have these like weird nubs that look like you pulled something out of it and it dried. Mm-hmm. So I think there was a way, and the scoop marks and stuff, there was a way to work with matter using that technology. I think there was tools that we think right now are just ritual tools or like ritual objects, but they were actually functional. I think they were being used in a way that your consciousness and your voice could control the manipulation of it. These things are still being really worked out at a scientific level, whether consciously or not, by the people that are doing it. If I knew 100% and I could tell you exactly how they did it, I'd probably be the richest man in the world. I would 100% do that. There's just you have to sift through a lot of like muddy stuff. People are very quick to jump on geopolymer, acoustic levitation, and stuff like that. And I'm like, if you're so confident about this, then why haven't you done it? If you're so confident that they levitated the stones of sound, why have you not tried it? Why are we not going that route? If they could create granite out of a geopolymer, then why can't you do it? We have all of this science, we have AI, we have all this stuff. Run it back, try and do it. And so until I see something like that, I'm very skeptical. The only thing I really like jumping on is Malcolm Bendel's stuff, just because I've seen it in action and I got some really good potential and a lot of scientific backing to it. So if you're interested in it, I would highly suggest diving into his stuff. Right now, it's pretty fringe and it's very technical, but I feel like it's going to get distilled down in the next couple years to be very understandable.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to check it out. So, do you think that we're ever going to have the answers, or we just have to accept that maybe not?
Actually, yeah, I think that we actually will. Let's run this back even further. If they were that good at future planning, and that means like leaving stuff intentionally so that we find it and we know what to do with it and we can unpack it because we're smart. If they were that good at future planning, how did they see the future? How did they know that was going to happen? Because like I can have a guess for what's going to happen next month, but I've read a lot of history. I've watched a lot of stuff. I've listened to a lot of people talk, and even the smartest people I know are not that great at predicting the future. So for them to have that much foresight, they seem to have had a window into looking at our time, or at least calculating a future that made sense. So when you look at all these monuments too, most of them are astronomically aligned, and not just a solstice or equinox, which would make sense. They're aligned to stars, they're aligned to constellations, they're aligned to specific movements, like the Mayans were obsessed with Venus. Like there's no practical reason why you align a monument and track Venus, not for biology or agriculture or anything like that. What were they doing? And to me, it's like they were creating these planetary gears. And if you know how a watch works, a watch cannot accurately keep time without a bunch of gears in it that spin at different rates and that calculate that time. They're called planetary gears. And it's based off of calculating the movements of celestial bodies. And that's how we used to tell time. If you think about that, then those things act kind of like a dial. They act as if we're calculating an exact moment in time with the watch. Could they have been doing that? And if they could calculate those things, like the Mayan calendar goes so far into the future, it's ridiculous. Like, why would you do that? Why would you need to do that? The only thing that makes sense to me is if they were using that data and those numbers to open up a window into viewing maybe us now, or maybe the past, or seeing these cycles and recording like what happens. Because if you could look at those things, you'd be like, I want a better future than the one I'm seeing. And then maybe you could, tweak that. We got to leave this right here at this time because this guy's going to discover it and then he's going to do something with it and then blah, 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 blah. All of the fathers of quantum science were mostly into Eastern mysticism and primarily from the Hindu tradition. And the more you read on that, it'll be very apparent that they're talking about quantum stuff. All of it matches up to quantum science so beautifully that they were able to turn it into art. Like that to me is just like a whole other story. But what I think they were truly doing is creating a window, and if they could do it, then we can do it. And that's the biggest thing that I like to tell people with all this stuff. If they can move the rock, we can move the rock. If they can carve that, then we can carve that. Like it's not impossible because it exists. That's the true value that you can pull out of any of this information is like, okay, it's great to look at and wonder how they did it, but like they did it. Someone has been here before and they did that stuff. And I want to know how we can do that stuff. I want to take all of that and I want to reverse engineer that so much that we can figure that stuff out. And maybe that was the goal all along, was to leave something like that we could unpack and do that with,
Okay, with all of this, where is the line for you, if there is one, between science, geometry, engineering, math, and spirituality? Like, how do they work together in all of this, if they do, from your perspective?
I don't separate them because I don't think that they did. With all my stuff, I try and put my head in their position. When I look at these things, I try and look at it from that perspective. Nothing is actually separate if you really think about it. The fields of study, even the way that we separate them, are all interconnected in some way, shape, or form. And that goes back to just all of us being interconnected in some way, shape, or form, right? So I think the thing that bridges all of those things is idea that everything moves and everything vibrates, like hermetic principles. That's how I base a lot of my paradigm of reality off of. Is we start off all as mind, like everything is mental, and then the next principle is everything moves, everything vibrates. It's vibration, and ideas, thoughts are vibrations, emotions are a vibration. Your whole body has a frequency that it works with. It's all based on this understanding of oscillation, and that's like a physics concept technically, but it's also a musical concept. Every key on a piano is a specific vibration, but that also is a It's a concept of, elemental sciences, because to make that noise, you're compressing air and that air is hitting your ear, and that specific pattern that was compressed in the air gets interpreted by your brain and turned into electricity, and you are making that a sound. You're making that compressed air a sound, and that pattern that hit your ear was perceptible because you perceive things using the proportions of the golden ratio phi. And so if your brain uses that as a code to see things and to hear things, if you're using all that, then there's something that's making this image. There's something that's giving you this experience, something that's creating the experience, and that's consciousness. Everything kind of revolves around that, and that's why, like, that first principle, the all is mind, is kind of the all-encompassing thing. Consciousness at its core is creating the experience, no matter what you're seeing, hearing, smelling, touching, tasting. All of that are just receivers for this one massive signal. So we're just like listening to this one song, and we're interpreting it from our unique vantage point of it. But at the back end of it, you have this conscious perception. It's kind of projecting a pattern of you. The one is projecting this beautiful mandala of you and me, and we're looking at it through that pattern, right? We're looking at it through this pattern. I don't think there is a separation when you look at it that way. And what I hate most about, like, all of the information that's being put out today is, like, we look at something from a psychological perspective or a scientific perspective. When they talk, they're like, as a biologist, how does that fit into everything? How do we integrate this with the whole, and moving to a holistic way of looking at it? But I don't see a separation in any of it, really.
Fascinating. I was going to ask you to define two things, and one was consciousness, and I feel like you kind of did that. From your perspective, what is spirituality or spiritual experience? Just would love for you to define that.
I think it's if that is everything, consciousness is everything, then I think spirituality is how deeply you connect with it. So, like, a non-spiritual person at all, I would define that person as very rooted in the material world, whether that means, like, just an objectively material person who only cares about their house and their car and their business and all this stuff, versus somebody who's objectively spiritual, who doesn't need any of that, who's just here for the experience and to be in awe at everything that exists. So if we set those as the two poles, then this one is really based on, like, just survival and how we can optimize this experience in the material world, because we don't have a concept of what happens after, right? So that is the core focus, is like, how much can I get here and now, because this is all I have. And then a spiritual person would be someone who looks at everything and is like, those things are cool, they're nice, I'll take them as experiences, but I'm not going to base my entire existence on optimizing that. I want to experience the full width of what we can have as people here. I want those experiences. I want to go on cool trips, and I want to have a nice home for my family, and I want to have very good friends, and all of these things that come with living a good life. And that's the material component, but the spiritual component's also there. What is the purpose of that? What is the purpose of having these experiences? And to me, that's the only thing I think I'm going to take when I'm not here anymore. I believe that the information that I gain here persists. My physical form does not, but the information that I gain here, it is a part of transformation. And whether or not, in a reincarnation format, or you go off and you go into universal conscious land and go to another planet or something and experience that, the stuff that you gained in this lifetime is what I like to collect. I like to collect those things. So I think there is a balance. I think that being too spiritual can get you fringes of not being a responsible member of society. And I think that being too material can also make you a very irresponsible member of society. So having that as like a collective idea, and not going too far either way, is the way that I like to look at it. And that's, I try and live that way. But I think it's very important to have both.
You're such a genius. I want to know your perception on everything. I was going to ask you, but I think you already answered it. Like, what do you think happens after we die? So, if our consciousness goes on and there's a potential to reincarnate or live in this other dimension or go to a different planet, if that's what you believe, what do you think the whole purpose of this whole experience and journey is? Like, why does this even matter?
When I went to Egypt, are you familiar with Matthias de Stefano?
Yes.
Okay, so he says he can remember all of his past lives, and after speaking with him and watching all of his content, like, it doesn't seem to be a fake at all. I can rattle shit off. I can say a lot of stuff off the dome. That guy can rattle stuff off that makes sense to me. And I went with Robert Grant, who's a genius too, and both of us are sitting here like, what? Like, it makes sense. Like, so he kind of opened the door for a reincarnation mindset, and I believe that it is, most from what I can tell, a choice in a way. There's like levels to this, there's like the the big universal mind that we all exist in. And then there's these like layers that eventually end in you, where you're at right now. And I think there's obviously a higher self that you're kind of communicating with. I think when we come here, we have like a mission of something I want to learn. Like I go to college because I want to be an engineer. I have to take prerequisites. I have to take some biology courses and chemistry and calculus and stuff like that. So I think when you come here, you have the goal to be an engineer. You have a goal to be a whatever whatever you feel pulled to, if you can tap into that and you're like really pulled to being a musician or a architect or something, I think that's what you came here for. You probably did because it's like lighting you up and it's giving you energy going in that direction. But you also get exposed to the prerequisites as you go through that. So you gain a lot of insight. But from dimensional perspective, like the way that Matthias explains it, there's a way to examine things that we have now, like in terms of how small we can look at things, like microscopes, electron microscopes. Like they're producing these images that are crazy, like all the detail we can see in these things. And we would never have that perspective if we didn't make the electron microscope. We had to create a device that could see that deep into whatever it's looking at. We're building blocks of what make it exposed. I think we're here to be that thing. If I could put myself into the electron microscope and then go into what it's looking at and explore that world, like you would be in the atomic world. You'd be like, this is insane. This is like one giant fractal. This is crazy. That feeling is what we have, is like an epiphany or like or awe, wonder. And I think that ultimately, if you take the spiritual perspective, which is basically water it down into the universe experiencing itself through multiple perspectives, then I think that the one thing that we are absolutely here to do is to uncover the details and the mechanics of what makes that universal mind tick, what makes it up. Like, how does it work? How does my body work? Like we're obsessed with how our body works and we barely really even know how it does. And there's entire fields of study that are obsessed with this. And, at a core, we're trying to make it better, but we're just genuinely curious too. Like, how does all this stuff form in you to make this experience? Now scale that up. How does the planets and stars, black holes and all this stuff, like how is this making that experience? So from a higher dimensional perspective, if you close your eyes and you imagine a star, right? You make a star in your head immediately. Like that is a idea in your head. You can visualize that star. But we didn't know exactly what the star looked like until we put a satellite over there and we could zoom in on it. And we were like, holy crap, this thing is a fireball and it's shooting all these things out and it's insane. So I think we're doing that at a smaller scale than even what we're working with our technology. I think humans at their core are that. The devices that a higher mind uses to examine itself. We are like the microscopes on a very specific part of the universe, and our collective experience is like giving this stream of data back and forth between the higher mind so it can kind of like tune into that experience. And that's what you get with my personal view, is just like the internet connection with that higher mind, observing everything that it actually is. I don't think there's a purpose. I don't think there is a goal, an intended goal. I think there is for specific societies and people and species. I think it just exists to exist. It just exists because it's lonely not to exist. It doesn't make sense to be and not have other things to be with.
Yeah, well done on explaining perhaps the biggest topic that has ever existed for the human mind. Thank you for making that accessible. I didn't write that many questions down for you, but I have like so many left, and I'm just going to try to pick and choose the ones that I feel like are most important based on the whole conversation that we've had, because I
Speed
could
round
just
it.
keep going. I know. I'm like, I didn't even get to go into like music as a spiritual experience and like all this stuff that I thought we would talk about, but that's okay. We can maybe have
Yeah.
another conversation. But
Yeah.
I'd love to know, just like based on, well, whether it's your work, your research, and your interpretation of the word spiritual is different from other people's, which I like. So what has been the most unbelievable or remarkable thing that has happened to you spiritually? Or I'll say that you've uncovered, like doing all the work that you've done.
So I really wasn't that. I was like a militant atheist when I was in high school. Like as a kid, I read the stuff and I was kind of about it, but it just fell off in high school, college, and I was just I was very scientific mind, and that was just like conflicting with everything. and there was nothing there to glue it together. That's why it was conflicting. Like I had beliefs that, this stuff sounds like it has some grounding and it could be true, but the fact that there's no evidence and there's no like material backing is really messing me up with my scientific brain. So I was obsessed with almost like deconstructing all of these traditions and being like, look how stupid this is. Then life happens to you and people close to you leave, or you maybe have some traumatic experiences or a death or something that you're going through, and you're like, it shakes up your perception and makes you think about the deeper questions, like what does happen after death? Why do we feel this way when, people close to us leave and stuff like that, which that didn't even push me over the edge to the point where I accepted another belief system. It was really music that to tie that in there. So we'll hit two birds with one stone here. Music really like opened the door for me. I was always into music since I was a kid. Electronic music really unlocked a lot for me. I had a lot of experiences with the way that artists were putting shows together that didn't make sense to me. I was feeling stuff I've never really felt before, and they were doing it in a way that was visually captivating. There was science behind it to make the show happen and to do these crazy visuals and put this audio together in a way that's like I've never heard before. That rocked me really hard. I grew up in Kansas. We didn't have a lot of like electronic shows in Kansas. We had a lot of country and rock and stuff, but like until I moved to Austin, I wasn't really exposed to that, and I thought it was just going to be the same kind of experience, and it was absolutely not. So that one shook me up, and then I got into like the live music scene around 2016 here. I had all this free time. There was a lot of research I did, like the pyramid stuff I was telling you about, and then super into psychedelic research, psychedelic therapies and stuff like that. I had a couple experiences, obviously in a completely legal setting. So it was more of a cascade of these blocks that I had built up of my view of reality, and one after another was just getting removed. And finally there was like, just one little shaky tower standing, and I kind of kicked it down myself. I was like, all right, I'm holding this up for no reason. I got to look into this. And then I just started consuming all the books I could on spirituality, consciousness, metaphysics, stuff like that. It plugged straight into sacred geometry, ancient history and stuff, and it just like synthesized things in a way I could never have planned myself.
I mean, you're definitely a genius. I'll tell you a funny little story because I know you're into the sacred geometry and all that stuff. My geometry teacher in high school told me, in other words, that I was not very smart.
Yeah.
So that was my
Usually how it
math
goes.
background.
Yeah.
All of this is just like, yeah, it's totally mind blowing to me, but I do love history and all that stuff. I mean, gosh, yeah, like I said, I could just keep talking to you forever. In summary of all the work that you've been doing, and honestly, it's mind blowing to me that you've put out. I mean, how many books? Because I have one of yours here right now. This is Cryptex Esoterica, and actually, I mentioned to you when we were emailing, you wrote some children's books, which honestly are a little bit easier for me to comprehend. Not putting myself down, but I did send them to my nephews, and they're so cute and I loved them. But yeah, like how many books have you written?
So that's hard. So, cause like I didn't know where to start. So I just started writing. My first one was Harmonic Alchemy. That was a self-help book based on Hermetic philosophy, which is getting a redo as we speak. And it's going to be the last one I write. I have 4 physical books, and then I have one that's completely digital and it's hidden history. It's because I have a lot of digital assets in there. There's 3D models of temples. There's a Google Earth map of all of these ancient sites. And I just keep adding to it whenever I find something interesting, which doesn't translate to a physical book. So those 4 are going to be the ones that stay. And that's Codex, Cryptex, Geometrix, and Harmonic Alchemy. So that's like my core knowledge base, I guess you could say. I have an online community where we talk about this stuff. So that's kind of like the furthering of that knowledge. This next phase, Base Forge 2.0, because I don't know where to go with it. That's where I took a fat break from music because this seemed to take priority. So now I think I need to reconnect with that. So this next year, I'm going to be all over the place in North America, at least, and I'll be taking some trips, Peru and a couple other places, but I will be doing a hybrid speaking music tour. So I'll be giving talks, and then we'll be doing shows in the same city, and we're currently working out logistics and stuff for that. But I really want to connect with people on a physical level and interact with the people that have supported me for the last 3 years and make it more of a authentic in-person event. I think we're missing a lot of that with this stuff that's going on. I think we need to bring that back. So that's the plan for the future.
Well, oh my gosh. Well, 2 things. Number one, you're the most productive person I've ever spoken to. And like all of this in 3 years. It's quite a lot. And second, Jade and I live in Asheville, North Carolina. So, we'll come see you somewhere. Yeah. This is a
We'll
good
be
spot for
stopping
that
somewhere
kind of stuff
close.
too.
Yeah.
So based on all the work you've done over the last couple of years, and I promise this will be my last question, what do you want people to know?
My driving force in all of this has been to really show people that accessing what they're truly capable of is not outside the realm of possibility. Because like what you said, your geometry teacher, when she said that you were bad at geometry, that probably put a little bit of a curse, I would say, on you wanting to explore this
Yeah,
a little
I
bit
was
more.
angry for
Yeah.
till now that I had to do geometry ever because I was
Yeah.
I was in English and history and not that, but yeah.
But if you knew that like you have access to a lot of abilities and a lot of hidden talents, but you were never really taught to tap into those. One of the fundamental problems of society today is people getting boxed into these prisons that they make for themselves just off of the interpretation of what other people are thinking and saying about them, which ultimately is irrelevant. If there's anything social media has taught me, it's that whatever people say on the internet or to your face even doesn't matter at all. And you can do whatever you want and you can make a life that you want and you can create it without harming people, or even better, you can create that by helping people. You can give people stuff and you can also be able to receive the benefits of giving people just by tapping into those things. All I want to do is maybe something that I post unlocks that in somebody. Like maybe something that the way I explain it makes it make sense in a way that removes those blocks, like the geometry block that you have. Or I had a friend that was horrible at math and he just like decided one day that he was going to be good at math and he got a degree in math. And I was like, well, this is clearly possible. Like I want to package that up and I want to make a framework and a system that if you go through all my content, there's not a single something in there is going to do that for you. That's why I make so much. And that's why I'm so broad with my stuff, because there's something in there that's going to pull on a string and it's going to make a light come on and you're going to be like, that's the one. I'm going that way. So
I'm definitely checking out your community. Can I tell you one thing? I'm like, I don't know if this means anything or if it has any relevance, but over the last couple of years, and it's happening increasingly frequently, sometimes if I'm just sitting and my eyes are relaxed, like I'm not focused on anything, I start seeing in like neon green, like all of these shapes against walls and stuff. I don't know what that means. I don't know if I have like an eye disorder or something. I don't know. I feel like I'm seeing geometric patterns. Don't know if that means anything.
Let's call them downloads and let's say that they're little nuggets of wisdom that are being implanted in your brain.
Yeah. Hopefully.
I don't know what they are, but if you look at it that way, then I feel like that's like you're adding to the library of your knowledge with these shapes. So take them.
We're going to go with that. We're going to go to it being an experience. So yeah, I mean, I don't feel like you need a ton of introduction because you're fairly well known on social media, but I would love for you to share your handles, where people can find you and how people can learn more from you on these most fascinating topics in such an accessible way.
Everywhere on the internet, I am baseforge.us, except for YouTube, which is baseforge_US. I am primarily on Instagram. TikTok hasn't been liking my content lately, and I will be moving to YouTube almost entirely here in the next couple months, just because the short form is very hard to do, and with music, that's going to be difficult. But I will be, like I said, I will be live in a pretty big city near you. So if you want to come see me, say hi, talk about some weird shit, I'm always down.
Love it. Thank you so much for just sharing your brilliance and your wisdom. I feel like I'm going to need to go back and listen to this episode several times just to take in everything. And I'm just so excited to learn more from you, because this is the stuff that like can keep you awake at night thinking about all of these mysteries. So yeah, I'm just super grateful to have you here, to have had the opportunity to talk to you. And like I said, to keep learning from you. So thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
It was a great convo, and I'm sure we'll probably do it again.
Yes, I would love that.